Great. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Educator Excellence Committee of the DCSBOE. Um, I'm joined tonight with committee members, Representative Vice President Williams and Representative Dr. Henderson, as well as teachers that we have invited to join us tonight as we talk through how we support especially new teachers in DC. And we asked the educators to send us some texts in advance. And in the interest of time, what I'll do first is highlight some of the main points that I found connecting these and start with one question, but would like to use this precious time that we get with you to hone in on questions from Dr. Henderson and Vice President Williams and I. Uh, so first, I think one of the themes that really stood out to me across the the text that you sent us is calling out a lack of formal new teacher support, um, and noting that the instructional coach was overburdened, how mentorship was informal, right? And that despite some professional development, new teachers lacked guidance beyond instructional technique as well as a reliance on external programs like City Teaching Alliance and informal co-teacher support. A second major theme that I read was uh, some ideas of what effective support could have looked like, right? So calling for a more structured induction program, especially within the first 2-3 weeks, more opportunities for peer connection, emotional support strategies, and management techniques beyond pedagogy, and more opportunities to observe strong teaching, um, as well as more planning time. And when we asked about policy recommendations, it was nice to read how some of the themes that stood out to me was also creating policies to create induction plans and calling out Connecticut's policies around early formative observations and linking evaluation to development plans, um, mandatory mentorship programs, professional development tailored to non-instructional needs, and dedicated funding for new teacher support, uh, as well as more substitutes, reduced first-year teaching loads, and expanded co-teaching models, as well as fellowship residency programs. So with this kind of just high-level context, and Tara, welcome. My preface had been that thank you for sending the text in advance. We know that our time with you is precious on a Monday evening, so appreciate the chance to read through what your thoughts on these questions and actually just get this chance to dig in deeper with some questions. So I've got a bunch, but before diving in, actually, Vice President Williams, Dr. Henderson, would love to hear uh, your questions and reflections from what the teacher sent. And we're just as a reminder, we're driving towards trying to better diagnose and then come up with solutions for particularly first year teachers and new teachers as they come in.
Yeah, I can jump in briefly. Thank you, Representative Chang, and thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate the initial thoughts and look forward to our discussion tonight. I think for me too, there's a variety of aspects and pieces to this puzzle, and I appreciated how the responses kind of took experience, but then also gave us some solutions that we can discuss today as well. I am interested to hear kind of like what that onboarding process more looks like with our dependent on like the support or lack of support, as you said, Representative Chang. And I can ask particular questions once we kind of open things up here in a little bit.
Yeah, I want to add my thanks for the advanced work that you all did. And it was striking that there were such commonalities across the um, the three um, teachers. It's my takeaways were kind of that first year teachers seem to be thrown in the deep end without much support. Um, and the support that teachers do get is largely informal and not quite enough. Um, and so I'm interested to hear more about what you think would help. And if it's time to go ahead and start with a question, Representative Chang, I'll start with that.
Please.
So given your experience of some informal um, mentoring, who in your building do you think would best be suited to support? And I mean like a type. Um, and what would they need in order to be able to support you? So it seemed like in some cases there might be somebody who was either designated or had stuff to offer you, but they didn't have time or they didn't have um, the structure or space to do that. Could you just say more about what type of person do you think would be best, um, and what would they need to be able to support a new teacher?
Um, I think that certainly I'm thinking of that second question of what they would need first. And that comes down to like time. In the daytime, whether you are a teacher or somebody who's focused on like behaviors and social emotional learning, all of us have so many responsibilities. So if we are asking more of somebody to support a new teacher, that's a new responsibility for them. So we would have to give them the time to, plan, but also meet with that person. In terms of the type of person to support new teachers, I think that just reflecting on last year being my first year, I think that I had some really helpful conversations with the behavior team on our seventh grade floor. I think that in terms of like instruction, I got a lot of feedback from when we did have an instructional coach last year, and we have a co-teaching model. So that was sort of developed throughout the year and just with practice. But without some real pointed feedback, I just sort of felt like I was throwing things at the wall when it came terms to sort of classroom management and managing behaviors and different sort of social emotional needs that the kids have. So definitely behavior folks. But I think that there's room for multiple people to support new teachers, given that it's such an important job and one that is so multifaceted. I think having like a support sort of board would both like lessen the load on an individual for helping out a new teacher, and sort of broaden the scope of what type of supports we get. So teachers, administrators, and behavior and social emotional, I think would all be helpful.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and
Yeah.
back up your thought about the board of support. I completely agree. One thing that I found was the most difficult my first year. I mentioned, I believe in my written feedback, that most of my support had been informal. And the reason for that was because there were formal structures at my school. And I found it almost the opposite of helpful because the people who were supposed to be helping me weren't hadn't been trained on how to train a new teacher. It felt very punitive, and it did not feel dedicated to my growth. And I had been trained in a very different model of behavior management than they had. So theirs was very, you need to follow the rules, no ifs, ands, or buts. And I had been trained in a very different, more like collaborative SEL method. So it's really important that whoever is being placed with new teachers has updated training on what new teachers are being taught and the most updated, most research supported methods. And I think the best way to achieve that is, as Don Roy said, a panel. No one individual teacher is going to have all of that content. So if there is an individual that a teacher can go to for content questions and a different individual that a teacher can go to for management questions, that would probably both lessen the load if these people are also still actively in the classroom, and allow for them to get more targeted feedback on a specific area. So I definitely wanted to flag that.
The informal versus informal piece is super interesting, right? Because in many ways, some of the issues that you all named in your written um, responses and guidance to us um, are both, you shared them at the high level, but I think the specific examples were actually quite different. And so I think I just want to test this idea that, does it need to be formalized? What is why not support more informal, or like provide more of the informal space with more um like one of the ideas that was shared was more around building out kind of peer networks too. And so I just want to play around with the idea of, that the challenge with formal is exactly what you're naming. How do you do it right and not have it be done as just another checkbox that is done poorly? And that is actually not easy to do well, right? Without constant, I think, constant vigilance. And so, I do want to talk about what we do there, but just before we move there, I would love to hear more about some of the examples of informal support that you got and how we could foster those, right? And support those kinds of, yeah.
I think for me, I'm a veteran teacher. I've been teaching for many years. So I know coming into the system, they didn't have mentor teachers or anything. So a lot of it was just, teammates checking on you and seeing how you're doing. And maybe there was a team lead, right? So they would have that team lead and you would go there, or, of course, that was a lot of pressure on them as well. But I think with the informal, it's good because it's just more of a check-in. How are you doing? Maybe, can you just check and see if this lesson plan was written correctly? What about this student? Can you do a buddy classroom or something like that? I think it's good, but I think for new teachers, I think more formal is better because it's a little more structured and it makes them feel like they have someone other than an admin or an instructional coach, and then you also feel as though if you wanted them to come into your classroom and just maybe observe, it's not feeling as though, oh my God, I'm being observed. This is, I'm feeling nervous. It's just more of someone who is just there to support you no matter what. So I think that when it's more formal, I think for new teachers, it gives them that structure and that it makes them feel better, to know that they have.
So then when for the three of you, and I would love everyone's answers here, was the formal support successful and helpful versus not helpful and more, of a checkbox? And Kara, did you say the word punitive? Yeah. Yeah.
So in DCPS at one point in time, they had mentor teachers. So like they would actually be assigned to certain teachers to come and work with them. So at one point,
Yep.
I think many years, probably maybe about 9 years ago, they were taken away, right? So then I think that's when you saw a lot of teacher transition where they were moving, they were changing, they were changing careers. They didn't want to do it anymore because that support was just not there, right? So I think that for me, once again, I think that having the support from admin and instructional coach, it's a little bit difficult. And I know that we want a panel and I know that we want it to be, a number of people. However, it's just going to be impossible for certain people who have all of those different duties to be able to come in and really effectively complete the job. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. What were you
What
gonna?
did you say? Sorry, what did you say was the name of the position that was taken?
It was the teacher mentor program. It was the teacher
Okay.
mentor. So I even actually, my brother was a part of it at one point in time, and they actually got paid to go to different schools and to mentor these teachers. And it was really, really, when was the teacher mentor program? Oh, it really worked. So I would say it probably impact for DCPS has been maybe 10 plus years. So maybe it's about 10 years ago. It was years ago. However, that's when you started to see the teacher turnover rate.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
And what
chime in
about
and
for the two? Yeah. Also, hi,
I was
Kat.
gonna say I would chime in, sorry, in agreement with that. I think when I say it felt punitive, the instructional coach being assigned specifically in our mentor role, they wear a lot of hats, and some of them are punitive and some of them are supportive. And I think trying to get an instructional coach to fully support a new teacher is difficult because you're not sure as a new teacher when they're like analyzing you and giving you feedback that is going to go on some sort of permanent record, and when they're just being helpful. So I think exactly that teacher mentor program sounds kind of like what I'm envisioning as a little bit more helpful, of like a fellow teacher who does not have any kind of a formal observational role over your classroom to kind of be that like shoulder partner with your teaching.
Hmm.
I think keeping those roles separate is more what I was thinking of in my previous comment, making sure it's not someone who also other times has, say over whether or not you still have a job next year.
Right.
I
Okay.
think too, like in addition to what's being said, I haven't heard about this teacher mentor position or program. I think it sounds like a pretty good idea. Um, but on top of the instructional coach being somebody that potentially can determine like your evaluations and have that sort of power over a new teacher, new teachers need very particular support. Like being in the classroom for the first time is a lot. And just having somebody whose role is dedicated to that would go a long way. Like everybody was receiving instructional coaching, whether they were a new teacher or a veteran teacher. But I think that if we're talking about like induction and preparing new teachers to not only be excellent at what they do, but be sustained in the work that they're doing and want to continue staying at the school in front of the communities
Yep.
that they serve, having a role that's for that purpose, I think would be helpful.
One thing, appreciate this. Jen, would you make a note to our team for our staff? It would be great to follow up on the teacher mentor program, why it was taken out,
Yes,
and what the
absolutely.
rationale was, and sort of yeah, what happened to it. And uh, Don Roy and Kara, the question that's super helpful, but the question I asked was what worked that was formal for you two? Because if we're doing more, if the advocacy is more formal programming, we should do the formal programming that worked and not the formal programming that didn't. So I get that having the role of the person doing it matters. I hear that. What else worked? Like what was positive that was formal and not informal?
I think, and this is for me personally, what was best was just having feedback, observation and feedback. And typically in our school, that would come from our assistant principal. So I think that it was just good for me to hear from another person who wasn't my co-teacher, what they were seeing and what I was doing and how I could grow and improve.
What's
I
interesting
think,
about that example too, though, is that
mhm,
that's potentially punitive and as a role too,
yeah.
right? Um,
And another sort of drawback I think of that is exactly that, is that um, sometimes I would have to be it's kind of formal in that it was happening it felt formal, I guess, because it was coming from an administrator. But the reality was if I wasn't asking, and I think I put this in what I wrote, if I wasn't asking for that feedback, it was only coming during impact season. It was only coming for my formal observations when I was being impacted. So it sort of was up to me how often I was being observed and getting that feedback that I needed.
What about for you, Kara? What were some of the formal pieces in place that were helpful?
I'm gonna sound like a real pessimist here. I was really dissatisfied with the formal training that was given to me my first year. I'm just gonna like cards on the
Yeah.
table. The formal training that worked for me was not given through my school, but what worked came through City Teaching Alliance, where I was given a coach whose job it was to meet with me on a regular basis, come observe me, give me feedback. So I would call that a formal structure, even though it didn't come
Yeah.
through my school. But yeah, I think
Did
the
it
model that
cost you
they
money?
the coaching was included in the program, but I did have to pay for the master's degree, so you could say that the coaching cost money.
Okay.
But I think that coaching model of someone who does not have that punitive impact, even though my school couldn't provide that, was a helpful formal model.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Hey, I've got a bunch more, but Rep Williams, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, this resonates with me particularly too as a teacher, right? I've been in both DCPS now and in the charter sector, and I've experienced a variety of different models. And I think the I don't know. I think the language that we talk about is important to make sure that as we're building solutions and trying to create progress, we're getting people on the same page. So we've said essentially like informal solutions, formal solutions. Um, I don't know if that's necessarily the frame.
Mhm.
But what Don Roy had kind of said that observations, that are focused on feedback and growth versus just impact, in which someone is in your room purely for an evaluative and punitive, potentially punitive measure, right? Is more anxiety provoking as a teacher. It is not necessarily viewed as having like your best interest at heart. It's not necessarily rooted in like the lesson or the unit or the um instruction that you've
Yeah.
been doing. I think that it's disheartening to hear that that's not happening unless you ask for it. So I think that would be the piece that I would want to see formalized, whether it be from another peer, right? Because I've been in schools where teachers have also, as part of our own professional development, like observed each other, say like, hey, I'm doing this unit. I want to focus on this inquiry model where students are doing this problem-based task, and have another teacher look at a particular thing, right? Because there's so many aspects of teaching that you can't look at everything all at once. Like, but let me get better at this one thing. Um, and so the other thing I'll say, and then just kind of open things back up to the teachers, is like one thing that I've worked with one of my constituents and a long-term educator with is also about like kind of what one of you was talking about with regards to the mentorship program, but like essentially like an element of formalized peer review, and a
Hmm.
way of rooting that in expertise, right? So like if you are a seventh grade science teacher, maybe there's certain elements of classroom management that like a sixth grade math teacher could help you with. But if you're trying to teach like something with regards to like doing a scientific lab, they haven't had experience in teaching you like how to conduct science in a way that could be useful. So I'm curious to kind of circle back to Representative Chang's original question, is like who would be most supportive, right? And I'm talking about support not necessarily with regards to classroom management. I want to kind of focus on this question of like support with regards to improving instruction. Like really, what do you think would be a like something that you would want to see more of, irrespective of how we try to get there? Yeah, that was. Does
Yeah,
anyone have any thoughts
that
there?
was a long question. That was, I'm trying to figure out how do I break this apart, but can we make the question a little shorter? What were you
Yes,
saying?
I
I'm
was.
sorry.
Yeah, it was a lot of processing with
Yeah.
and synthesizing, but essentially, like, what have been the most useful supports that have helped you grow as a teacher, like in terms of your instructional practice?
So I was actually chosen several times in a number of schools to be a teacher mentor, right? But it was more so like maybe on a grade level, on the same team or something. So it really was easier, if that it was probably easier for me because we were on the same grade level. So let's say it was a math teacher and I was a reading teacher, and we were both you know, and it was a new teacher, so I was able to support that teacher. But I just think that when we talk about teacher mentoring and we're talking about new teachers, that's where it's very tricky, because new teachers are coming in with not a lot of experience on what to do within the classroom, as in so many areas within the classroom. So it's kind of tricky to even say who can be that person that can mentor that one, because you may be able to mentor them with instruction, and then you may not be good with classroom management. And then so it's like a whole different, it's a bunch of different skills that everybody needs to come with, right? So for me, once again, and this is, I'm very adamant about this, is that I feel like there needs to, the program needs to be brought back, because they still have it in PG County, okay? And the program needs to be put back in place, teacher mentor, so that they can be able to have all of those skills, trained on all of the skills that the teacher needs, rather than who can I get? Can I get that one person over there for this? Can I get that one person over for this? You know, to support with those things. I mean, that's just me. That's how it feels.
Yeah, in terms of content area support, one thing my school does that I think we have the luxury to do because it's such a small school, but we do common planning times for teachers of the same content area. And once a week, we have a formalized meeting on the calendar for teachers of that content area, which I know a lot of schools try to do, but I do find that kind of access to a panel of my peers to just kind of bounce ideas off. I find it helpful to this day as an experienced teacher, but I also found it helpful as a new teacher, so that I wouldn't have to seek out those people. I was consistently meeting with other teachers of my content area.
I think I would agree that, and I think, I don't know sort of why or what the structure is, but I feel that this year I've had less time to plan with other social studies teachers, but that content specific like peer support was really, really helpful for me last year. And another thing that I wrote about was just in general what helped me grow as an educator was having a co-teacher. My co-teacher last year was a second year teacher. So both of us had limited experience in the classroom, but even still, just at the end of the day, being able to give one another that, hey, I noticed you did this move. Maybe we can try it this way tomorrow. Um, just day after day, period after period, um, growing with one another was super helpful. And then this year, I have a co-teacher that's been teaching for 20 plus years. And it's the same thing where even if I don't have the same experience as she does, I don't have the same experience as she does. So I have things that I can share that she can grow from, although she has a good amount of things that she can share that I can grow from. So I
That's
think
great.
the co-teacher model, while it's definitely not a stand-in at all, not a stand-in for like proper, I think what we do need is formalized induction programs specific to new teachers from both the district and from schools. Um, if the question is what helped me grow the most, without a doubt, it was having a co-teacher.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Miss Ife, first of all, how do I pronounce your name correctly?
Oh, you said it awesome. You said
Oh,
it
great.
right.
Super. Wow. Um, you mentioned you have done teacher mentoring. What did how did they structure that for you? And sort of, was it just, hey, now you'll go do it and on your own time and whenever no additional kind of guidance or kind of you do it at these hours or anything like that?
No, not at all. I always had a passion for helping new teachers. That was just me. That's in my nature. You know, I just go and migrate to the new teachers to ask if they need support. And a number of the admin, they saw that and they were like, oh, okay, can you mentor this teacher or can you give support to this teacher? It was never formal or anything. It was just more of an informal thing. However, we would meet after school. I would push into her classroom on my, I'm sorry, that's my dog's toy. Oh,
I'm good.
okay. And I would push in, come and do a short observation because it's really difficult to do observation as a teacher, unless someone's holding your class. And I would just do little things, call her up. Hey, what do you need? What is this? So it was a couple, I had two, I did it twice and I really enjoyed it. And they loved the support that they got because it didn't feel like I was that person watching over them or had to could
So
hide.
it sounds like though you are not everyone who was a teacher mentor, and that so if we were to formalize that, for example, like everyone gets a teacher mentor and it's someone else, everyone gets a Miss Ife. How would you design that?
Oh wow. I would have to sit down and think because it was so informal. I would really
Right.
have to sit down and think how it would be done, but it would not it couldn't be a Miss Ife as a teacher. It could not be
Yeah.
me having the duties to be able to be a teacher and a structured mentor teacher. But
Mhm.
I could definitely design it because that is what I've gotten my master's in and everything, teacher leadership. So it's more so that is what I want to do. So I would definitely be able to structure a teacher mentor program or being a mentor teacher. Yeah.
I think the other reality that needs to be acknowledged in this conversation is that the likelihood of new programs being added, even if they were old programs back in the day in this budget cycle, is probably very, 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 very low, right? And so I think part of this, the reality that I want to name is like I would love to have a reach for this committee that we're trying to advocate for, but also understand if we have to force rank things, how they rank, right? And what I'm hearing from everybody is bring back this program, right? That's interesting, I'm really looking forward to learning more about what it was and why it ended, right? But I can't see a world where that's not actually a new budget line, right? And so there's the kind of like budget free models that and they're not so, right, because they're just models that I don't think necessarily change or add budget lines like co-teaching in a way, Don Roy, which I think is super interesting, right? It's taking the resources that exist and kind of reallocating them. Um, but I think with that caveat of it's a hard year to ask for more money for anything, how else would you think about, bring the program back is up here. What are some other things that are similar to what Don Roy was saying about co-teaching that come to mind as possible, no additional fee solutions?
I think I just want to name that. I think what you were describing, Ife, is phenomenal. Of a teacher sort of going out of their way on top of their duties to mentor other teachers. Um, if that weren't sort of formalized, I do see where administrators could sort of, I don't want to say take advantage of teachers, but sort of recognize the kindness of certain educators over other ones and just laud that responsibility onto them. And that's something that we can't control from this conversation, or I guess really much from a policy standpoint either. But I think it's just something to be sort of weary of. And outside of like the co-teaching model for things that we can do that wouldn't be a budget ask, and I put this in my response as well. Um, Sort of having a mandate that there is something um, to say to schools, to say to school leadership, you have to have something in place for your new teachers. And maybe setting some parameters about like length and content, about what is going to be there. But like when my hire date was August 28th, 2023. It was the first day of school. I was hired in the summer. So I had nothing. I had no time before I got in. I did not have an email. I did not have a computer. So when I see that question about what was I in the dark during my first semester, I was in the dark about everything. Basically what I set out for myself in those that first month of school, I'm going to learn my kids' names, so that I can build relationships with them, and we can get somewhere. But I think that they're just, I really was a little bit frustrated in those first few weeks. Not even so much with the logistical stuff about not having access to tech, but just that there was nothing there to really receive me outside of my co-teacher, who again was a second year teacher himself, and just trying to adjust to being in the classroom and doing all the things at the beginning of the year.
Can I say this real quick? I think that definitely having professional developments for teachers. Like, so you know how they always have professional developments and you're sitting here and it's redundant, right? And you're sitting here like, are you serious? We heard this already. Maybe there can be a professional development strictly for the new teachers, right? And it can be admin, it can be all the leadership team, right? And then it'll just and they'll be able to give that wealth of knowledge, meaning they'll give resources. They'll be able to now begin to maybe build, you know, a team, right? Where this goes back to what Cara, I think your name, okay, what
Kara,
Cara,
yeah.
yes, what Cara said, because now we're looking at it realistically, like, right, you know, if the program can't come, okay, this is what we may need to do. And then that's where you can build your team, where each person would be able once a month or once every 2 weeks, you know, just to do a check-in, or but building those resources, you know, and giving them information, whether it's a document, whether it's a PowerPoint, whether it's a piece of paper, who knows?
Yeah.
You know, just giving them the resources to be able to be successful throughout the year. So that professional development needs to happen in the beginning and then in the middle, you know, to just check in to see how they've been doing, how it's going, you know. So I think it's just give them some professional development.
Playing devil's advocate here, because I think every professional development program that currently exists that I hear is redundant and not useful and annoying and just a checkbox started with, I think, good intentions like this. And so I think the question here is actually, well, broadly, if we if we were to push that route, how do we make sure it's actually useful, right? And not just another checkbox to hit. And I think one of the ways that would help me wrap my head around that is like, okay, so first, I think what I'm hearing is you all did the same professional development then training as everyone else. It wasn't necessarily a differentiated one for a first year teacher. Okay, that's really interesting. But I think one of the questions I have then is, what were the existing professional development sessions that you found useful in your first year, right? Because those are also ones that we should keep, perhaps. And if Donroy, you're saying none of them, then I don't think we add another one, because clearly they're not being facilitated well, and this would just be another one, right? So, yeah.
I
Yeah,
think that, go ahead, Kara.
No, you go ahead and I'll jump in to add to you.
Okay. I think that, yeah, I made that face because I definitely think I had to dig deep when you asked which ones of professional development were helpful for me as a first year teacher. I definitely, like, I think I'm in the minority of most teachers, and maybe it's because I'm so green, but I kind of like professional development. They are not yet redundant for me. All of it is very new. So I think that there was a lot of interesting stuff sort of about social studies content that we get, at least from DCPS, on those professional development days. But to your question and your point, no, none of them were tailored towards new teachers. So that's why I would say, like, out of if what was like most helpful, I couldn't pinpoint. but perhaps I could if it were something that were designed to help new teachers. And I think like just thinking about the DCPS calendar, I know that we have the PD day in October. If there were sessions, because we have it's all virtual, it's all online. If there were sessions, and even an in-person option for new teachers to go in and say like this is the new teacher session, because I know like for every PD day, there's like they'll have music teachers go down somewhere, they'll have art teachers go to the Smithsonian and have their professional development. So having a space for new
Mm.
teachers to A, build a sort of peer support group, but B, get tailored sort of professional development for us, I think that would be really helpful. And just even saying like having a peer group of new educators, I know that last year, and I don't know if it's happening this year because I don't get the emails, but there's this thing called the New Educator Network. I don't know how fleshed out that is with DCPS, but they would have, I think, monthly events for new teachers. But again, that was something that you'd opt into. So I went once or twice and I met people that were there, but it was only it was like five, the turnout was very, very low. And there were no other people that were like brand new to the classroom like myself. It was mostly people that were new to DCPS coming from the
Right.
charter sector or somewhere else. So maybe fleshing that out and giving in-person PD options for new teachers.
Passing to Kara first, and then Ben, I see your hand.
Yeah, I think I found the professional development more helpful as a first year teacher, but have found over the years since then that I am now required to still go to the same professional development that first year teachers go to, and it feels less helpful over time. So I do think the existing professional development is supporting new teachers. I think the thing with first year teachers that makes PD feel like a waste of time is you go in and you get just like a deluge of information and then no time to put any implementation into it. You don't get any time during the session to plan and add it to your lessons. And everything as a first year teacher takes 2 or 3 or 4 times as long as it takes an experienced teacher, because you don't have systems and you're trying things and you're struggling to implement new systems. So I really think one of the keys to this professional development working, whether we add new ones or we just keep what we have, is more planning time for first year teachers to actually implement what they are taught. Because I really think a lot of it is just getting lost by the wayside.
Which
So I just want-
contradictorily means, not adding additional formal things necessarily, right? But actually creating more space by taking more of the formality out, perhaps too.
Yeah. And I think the key that I had mentioned in my written input is additional planning period for first year
Right.
teachers.
Yes.
I
Yep.
think is crucial.
Yeah. Interesting. Rep Williams.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. And I think sadly, the reality is often like the opposite. Like, first year teachers get the hardest jobs, like the most critical jobs, because more veteran teachers have been able to like identify the classes that they want to teach as opposed to like the classes that some people least prefer to teach. But the question I had for Don Roy in particular that I was just kind of curious about to parse out something a little bit is with regards to the onboarding process at DCPS this year from a curricular standpoint. I know they share like the general unit reviews and stuff. What was your experience like figuring out like your units and lessons and like getting actual concrete materials? And what do you think could have been helpful for there? Because to kind of connect this with what Kara was saying, like I think new teachers sit through all of these PDs and they get all this information at them, and then it's like, what am I actually going to teach? How am I actually going to like do things with kids? And then you realize that you just sat through a full day of professional development and you got none of that.
I think the answer to that sort of speaks to a larger issue of disconnect between what the district plans and what actually happens in schools, which I think it could be the greatest induction program in the world, and it wouldn't account for that happening. But in terms of social studies, that's what I can speak to. They do pretty good with having materials available for us. I think definitely last year I relied heavily on what was there. I would definitely alter a lot of the things and make my own changes so that especially as I got to know my students a little bit better, what they need and what would prepare them the best. But in social studies, there's units and there are materials. There's not like a formal lesson plan for any of them, but they have like overarching questions, which is really helpful for me when I'm designing the lesson to that you're trying to the point that you're trying to get to. So I think that the stuff there was helpful, but I don't think that that was related to like what I was hearing on a PD day. I think that more has to do with the social studies team that's at central office designing those lessons. They are also the ones that design the PDs, but I don't think that there was, at least in seventh grade ancient history for last school year, I don't think that there was much alignment between what we were learning in PD sessions and what the materials given to us were. But they were still helpful in that there was some general like social studies, historical skills, best practice that we were learning in the PDs.
Thank you.
I have a
Rep
question,
Henderson,
maybe,
any questions on your side?
maybe best for Ife, because she's seen this play out more times. But I'm wondering how much discretion administrators have in either creating a culture for the informal or formalizing various parts of what we've talked about.
Well, I really wouldn't know. I just know that they have a lot of duties, they have a lot of things to do. So being able to create it is who's going to volunteer, who's going to, they can't push it on them. So I guess being able to really sit back and see who's going to be that person who's going to volunteer. I don't think that me personally, I don't think that they really care about that right now. Not to say, I don't know if that's a bad thing to say, but I don't think that's on their radar. That's not really, I think that they really begin to look at the instructional coaches and stuff to push in and do stuff like that. So it's really hard for them to sit back and say, let's try and get a team. But that's why I say if you start in the beginning and not saying that it's mandatory, but try to build it, build that culture in the beginning, then people may just say, you know what? I might be a part of that team for 2 months and then I'll switch and have somebody else be a part of the team for another 2 months or whatever. So it's like they have to come up with some sort of some strategy or some way that people would, might be involved, even if it's admin pay. I mean, no, give them some admin pay. And then if you get some admin pay, I'm sure if it's in the budget early on, or if this is something that you want to continue to keep the teachers and you want to continue to not have a high turnover rate, you got to make some choices. So I don't know, but for me, I've seen admin, that's not their focus right now. That's more towards the instructional coaches and the intervention coaches or whatever to build that rapport with those teachers and help them through it, even though they're stressed. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I very much agree with Representative Chang's assessment of the budget outlook and that it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to get an additional program or additional position. But I'm also struggling a little bit with this and some other things of thinking like, why is this extra? Like, why is this, not built in to what we're doing here? It seems so essential. And I'm struggling to kind of see how that's been lost or how to recover it.
I think also that because there's so many teachers and there's so like, teaching is not, I'm not saying that it's not difficult to get into teaching, but it's like there's a lot of people that want to be teachers, right? So if you want to be a teacher, then even if a principal is looking at it saying, oh my gosh, this first year teacher wasn't good or whatever, and she left, I could just get a new one. I mean, that unfortunately, that's probably how they think sometimes, instead of building a solid team. And saying, these are the people that I want, and this is a highly effective teacher, and I want to keep her. So I guess, I don't know. They just have so much on their plate. So I just think that it's not intentional, but I think they don't look at it as being necessary. And being in the system for many years, I don't see any principals that feel that this is like necessary so far, unless it is mandatory for them to have a professional development or to do something to build that culture. And culture is everything in the school system.
Yeah.
Like if you're not building culture in your school, nobody's going to want to work. Nobody's going to want to come to school. And then that's when the morale goes down. So I think they need to look at that and say, wait, we need to start from the beginning and look at this and say, this is what we need to focus on, because those new teachers are going to work. I'm being real. It's the veteran teachers, it's the other ones that are kind of tired and stressed and burnt out. Not saying that new teachers aren't, but when you get those new teachers, you're able to mold them and to be able to help them, and then they get excited more, and then they're able to produce more. So it's that culture, and if they can't build the culture in their school, the school's just going to go down, even if it's new teachers, old teachers, all types of teachers.
One of the other ideas that you're making me think of, as I was asking some other teachers about this question that we're talking about this week, that came up, was actually management training for the administrators, because it felt like the management skills of, especially as a first year teacher, of your the folks you're reporting to were just not there. That, like, it was very varied. I'm seeing some nods. Does that resonate with your experiences, and would that have been helpful as well? I think, yeah, my thing on the board is literacy, and I always say that just because you know how to read doesn't mean you know how to teach reading, and I think just because you were a good teacher does not mean you were a good manager. It's very different skill sets, right? And so as we think about that piece, if you're nodding along, I'll explore that more as well. And Rep Williams, thanks for joining us, and I'll use that as a cue then to wrap up here. But to the teachers, thank you for sending what you wrote in advance. Thank you for answering our questions. We will very likely follow up with more, and would appreciate your guidance, and also interest to other teachers to think this through as this committee explores this in more depth this year. But really appreciate it. Dr. Henderson, any closing thoughts? Jen, anything else we need to do before we wrap up?
I just want to say thanks again. I believe this was very helpful, and appreciate the time that you all took to share with us.
And for me, I don't think so. Representative Chang, I'll just connect with you one-on-one regarding next steps.
Super. Okay. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you all
everyone.
for the time. I got a
Evening.
like a 1 second soapbox of, like, in terms
Sure.
of feasibility, and I wrote this down in my thing too. Thinking about the cost of funding quality educators, it pays off down the line. And I'm sure you already know that on the State Board of Ed, but bring that message to other decision makers who are sort of less receptive to funding education and our needs fully, that this stuff does actually have a financial benefit for the city.
Love it. You're preaching to the choir here, and I would highly recommend that you share the same message to our council and to the mayor's office. Yep.
Thank
But
you for
thank you.
having us.
Thank you. Bye.